Today, we're going to have a very interesting conversation. And I bet many of you saw the flyer. I Instagram, therefore I am your child's brain on social media. This is a topic that is so apt. My name is Ngozi Okose, and I'm the Director for Culture, Diversity, and Inclusion of Harvard Alumni for Mental Health. Harvard Alumni for Mental Health was actually created in 2014 with a mission to connect alumni and students and families in an engagement that expands mental health awareness and access globally. Our activities are pretty expansive. We offer weekly informed events, so please go to our website, check the events, and we have weekly activities. And most of our activities are designed both for mental health professionals and for members of the community. Sorry, I'm playing double role. Our Director of Communication is not here to handle the tech fast, so I'm doing that. Of community. We want to support our members worldwide. We want to support our members' friends and families worldwide. So we are not limiting our engagement just for Harvard alumni. We are also expanding it to their friends and families and members of the community generally. We also offer many events designed to lower the stigma around mental health and facilitate access to care through a network of discounted mental health professionals who are culturally competent, because we want to provide for our multicultural community. Our events are free and is open to all. You can read more about us by subscribing to our monthly newsletter or by following us on social media. I'm going to post every information that you need to reach us as we navigate. Today, we are lucky to have an expert on family and tech, Julie Jagan. We have so many questions for her. We want to know what really happens to our kids' brain when they get too engaged in digital media platform. We want to know the root causes of the addiction, what gets them to get sucked into that activity. And we want to know what we as brothers, sisters, parents can do to help these kids. Many times when we have our event, we partner with alumni clubs or other entities to co-sponsor the event. Today, we are partnering with HSIO to have this conversation on the impact of social media. And we are fortunate to have the founder and CEO of HSIO. It's a nonprofit organization that provides resources, coaching, and programs to break with mental health stigmas and build skill sets for individuals and organizations as well. I am going to introduce her, the moderator, okay, because she is going to be the one to navigate this interview. We're going to hear more from her. Her name is Bahia L.O.D. Bahia is originally from Morocco. Bahia moved to Boston to pursue an MBA at Harvard Business School, where she graduated with honors. She then joined MIT Open Learning to develop a learning platform for African youth. Prior to her MBA, Bahia worked at Google and as a consultant at Bain & Company. Bahia founded HSIO, like I said, is a nonprofit organization. I'm going to hand over now to Bahia so she can tell us a little more of organization, and then she will drive this conversation with Julie. Bahia, I hand over to you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Ngozi, for the introduction. And I am thrilled to have today Julie. So Julie, she's the Wall Street Journal Family and Tech columnist. She covers the impact on technology on everyday lives of family. And prior to creating the column, she covered every corner of the food industry, so very different aspects as a corporate reporter. writing about restaurants and packaged food companies. And before the journal, she worked at Crane Chicago Business, the Denver Alt Walkie Westward, and the Boulder Planet. She was raised in Denver and survived 10 long winters in Chicago, something that I will have been unable to do as a Moroccan, and currently lives outside of Los Angeles with her husband, 3 young children, and 3 cats, and a better weather, I hope, too, and milder summers. So with any further ado, I would love to enter into this conversation. And also, you can start asking your questions if you want in the chat, but just be aware that we will have some 20-25 minutes at the end, so you can ask the question live or put them in the chat, whatever you feel the most comfortable to. And the aim is really at the end to have an engaging conversation, given that the topic is on top of many of our minds. So yes, so let's go. So first of all, my first question for you, Julie, was what motivated you to start working and to focus on tech, family, and then more particularly on social media and teens' mental health?
Well, yeah, thank you, Baya, for having me. It's an honor to be able to address all of you. I really appreciate this. And it's obviously a topic dear to my heart. You know, I applied for the job of covering family and technology because it was something that really resonated with me personally. As Baya said, I was a corporate beat reporter for many years at the Journal. And when the opportunity came along to cover the impact that tech has on families, you know, I felt that that would be a really great opportunity to do a lot of research into a very undercovered area and provide more insight that could be helpful to families. You know, tech was a frequent topic of conversation in my house. As Baya mentioned, I have 3 kids. They're now ages 7, 10, and 12. And, you know, they were just starting to be at the ages where they were using iPads and other technology. And so I was really interested in knowing more about how this digital world might affect them and shape them. And since taking on this beat a couple of years ago, as I talked to parents and teens and started to read a lot of research as part of my everyday reporting on the beat, I heard more and more concerns about the way social media was making teens feel, and decided that that really needed to be paid more closer attention to in my column. And then especially when my colleagues who broke the Facebook files stories that you might be familiar with, when they found more evidence of the impact that Instagram in particular was having on teen girls and their body image, I decided to do a deeper dive.
Yeah, thank you so much, Julian. You have done an extensive work on actually all the mental health issues that have been raising, right? And that have been increasing, like depression, isolation, all across stream, very specific tics that actually we started to see in kids that have never been here, right? This kind of special cases that even the doctors didn't understand. So would you like to talk more about that?
Yeah, I mean, I want to preface this by saying that there are many very good aspects about social media. You know, it can be a way for teens to find support and connection that they might not otherwise have or be able to find in person. And that was true for a lot of teens during the pandemic. But the flip side of that is that I learned that a lot of the most vulnerable teens, those teens and adolescents who already had underlying mental health issues, those teens especially can be more negatively impacted if they veer into troubling content and if they watch too much of it. So for example, as Baya mentioned, I wrote last fall about this global phenomenon in which doctors were realizing that many teen girls were exhibiting tics after watching TikTok videos of people with tics. It was a really amazing finding. Doctors all over the world were seeing patients fill their offices, and these were young girls who typically didn't exhibit tics or Tourette syndrome specifically. It's a syndrome that many of you may know tends to affect boys far more than girls, but there were a lot of videos that had the hashtag Tourette that girls were finding on TikTok, and they were watching hours and hours of these videos. I also wrote about teens, again, many of whom were already undergoing treatment for mental health issues, who watched video after video about various mental health disorders and how to recognize the signs of them. Some of these disorders, like borderline personality disorder, are very rare among adults and almost unheard of in teens. And yet there were teens that were convincing themselves that they had these disorders. And that was causing friction in their families. And for some kids, it was constituting a setback during their treatment. And those were some really extreme and unique examples, but there are also many other just, maybe less extreme examples of content, many rabbit holes that teens can go down, and it can be reinforcing. So, if all you're seeing are videos about people who restrict their calories or work out all the time in order to look good, it's going to have an effect on how you see yourself.
I understand there is also those differences in the way that different social media platforms get people trapped, right, in those in this rabbit hole of lower and lower self-esteem. So, for example, Instagram may foster more comparison versus TikTok that you just like this, keep going, right?
So, yeah, I mean, the algorithms are designed to show viewers more of the type of content that they seem to watch most frequently, especially on TikTok. The way the algorithm works, and my colleagues and I have investigated how that works, is that as you watch or linger over a piece of content for a particular amount of time, the algorithm detects that that's something you must be interested in, and it shows you more of the same. And that has been particularly problematic for certain types of content that can be harmful. So, teens are curious. They may watch, a video about self-harm or eating disorders. It may not be something necessarily that they want to see, but they're kind of curious. But then their feed becomes filled with videos like that. And that's where it can be really problematic for young people who don't have the self-control to pull back and say, wait a second, this is too much. I shouldn't be watching this. It takes a fair amount of self-awareness and self-control to be able to stop that, even though there are tools within these systems of these social media platforms to indicate that you don't want to watch any more of a certain type of video. It's kind of asking a lot of a teen to have the self-control to be able to press that button and say, I don't want to see any more of this kind of content.
So that brings me back, because you mentioned we're speaking mostly about kids and teens. And does social media has or had more during COVID the same impact on adults or on a specific population of young adults? You have been talking also about perhaps moms that were feeling more isolated, etc. So do you see the same impact or different impact on adults?
I mean, adults can definitely get sucked in too, and they can face similar types of harm from the content they see. I've written about loneliness as being a major problem, especially during the pandemic. And that's when a lot of adults turned to social media to find connection. And as I've reported, many have found that to be sort of an empty connection. So, and we all know adults who use social media far too much. So it's not only an issue that affects kids, but adults have a greater ability to know when to pull back, even though it can be hard. And it's, oftentimes adults have problems limiting their time and managing their emotional reaction to what they see on social media. But kids are up against a much more difficult hurdle. Self-control is something that's underdeveloped in kids' brains. The part of the brain that's in charge of making good decisions isn't fully developed until people are 25. You might argue it's not always fully developed in adults ever. But it's really unfair to expect kids to know when to stop or how to divert their attention from dangerous or harmful content and switch that to more positive content.
Yeah, so because you have also talked about the impact that not only the social media has on teens' mental health as a symptomatic way, right? Because when you go to the doctor, you have the tics, etc. But also, as you just mentioned, on the brain development, and that's really a bigger issue, because if we think this is going to be reversible or not, they're more vulnerable. So, which is the kind of impact that scientists have seen really on the cognitive development on the brain?
I mean, I don't think we we know the answers to that yet. You know, we're approaching the 15-year anniversary of the iPhone, which was really the start of the smartphone generation. So while that's a fairly lengthy amount of time, it's not probably enough data yet to fully understand how these developments in accessible mobile technology have had. But there's already some signs that things like repeated watching of fast-paced videos, like the ones on TikTok and to some extent YouTube, have an effect on kids' attention spans. You know, one psychiatrist I interviewed for a recent column said that when the brain repeatedly processes rapid, rewarding content, it becomes harder to process slower, less rewarding things. It can be harder for kids who are accustomed to watching video after video to switch from that to something like reading books or even watching long-form movies, feature-length films, because they're much slower paced than what they're accustomed to seeing on social media platforms. And we know that the ability to pay attention for a sustained period of time affects your ability to learn and complete tasks that require focus, like things like reading books for school and writing. The National Institutes of Health is funding a study of about 12,000 adolescents as they grow into adulthood to examine the impact of many things, including digital media, on cognitive development. So it may still be a few years before we really understand how all of this is affecting cognition and brain development, but there are some early signs that that there are impacts, and shortened attention span in particular is one to really watch out for.
Yeah, no, thank you for bringing that out. And also, it's true that, as you mentioned, perhaps we can see this on the cognitive development of the brain, but then the impact that this may have in education, in learning. Did you have any insight into that by any change, or is still too soon perhaps to even?
There has been some research that has shown that that students who watch, you know, spend a lot of time watching videos and have shorter attention spans do worse at school, have lower grades, and perform worse on exams. Or who, you know, if they're using technology in the classroom, that can be a big distraction as well. So I think there's enough initial research to signify that there is a concern about this.
Yeah, and we all have this in mind. The COVID has affected in a big way this kind of trends of overuse of social media. Is there any particular change that you have seen through your reports?
Well, I think the biggest trend has just been the skyrocketing use of digital media among kids and adults alike. Yeah, I think maybe some of that usage has fallen back a bit as kids have returned to in-person school and resumed other pre-pandemic activities like sports and camps and play dates. Those are all good things to be back having, but some of the new tech use is here to stay. You know, schools in their response to the pandemic, you know, had to be prepared for remote school and had to, if they weren't already providing devices to students, they had to start. And there became this, you know, necessary habit of conducting all coursework digitally, where assignments are given out and submitted online. And so for a lot of kids now, even if they're back in school in person physically, they have to tote their laptops to every class. They're on their laptops all day long, not always on for educational purposes. So the reliance on technology, I think, is one that's certainly here to stay and is not going to be dialed back.
And you actually mentioned the fact that now that COVID is kind of calming down, and hopefully for the next month, years, and time to come, and you have and kids are coming back to school and having in-person activities. And as something that you reported to is that, as you mentioned, during COVID, mental health clinics, therapists were overcrowded, right? And now that we are coming in this post-COVID area, are you seeing the change that happened during COVID is persistent, or there is any improvement in the case reported, or even in the behavior, in the insight that you are finding?
I mean, I think a lot of students, especially this school year, have really found it to be an adjustment to return to school in person. What I've read and what I've heard from talking to teachers and other educators is that they've been dealing with a lot more behavioral issues this school year than they ever have before, because for many kids, when they were coming back this year, they were kind of at the same developmental stage or age that they were, approximately 2 years ago when schools shut down. And so they were dealing with essentially much younger kids. So if you were starting middle school, you were still, at kind of the developmental stage of a fourth grader, because you hadn't gone through all of the experiences that fourth and fifth graders do before they get onto middle school, which is kind of a whole other ballgame. And so schools have been dealing with a lot more behavioral issues among their students, a lot more mental health issues among their students. So I hope that will get better as people adjust to sort of pre-pandemic school life again. But I know from talking to a lot of educators and parents that this year has been really tough for a lot of kids.
Yeah, but that's another interesting point that you addressed. It's also the underlying issues, the root cause of all the symptoms that we are seeing, mental health disorder, etc. And at the end of the day, sometimes we wonder if social media is perhaps not another way to another symptom of deeper underlying issues, right? And I wonder if you have investigated and find any insight about actually what perhaps our earlier childhood can affect our social media use, or even the way we tend to get addicted to those platforms.
Yeah, I mean, there's a pretty big body of work and study into attachment style, and how your earliest experiences with your caregivers, I mean, even as young as being an infant, can have an impact on how you interact with others in your personal life as you get older. And so several mental health professionals have studied the relationship between the attachment we form with caregivers as very young children and our social media use. And there have been several studies that have found that people who had very anxious attachment styles, meaning they didn't feel secured from their caregivers, and became anxious about it, and they had the most problematic social media use. The theory is that people who didn't get the level of nurturing that they needed as very young children tend to search for that throughout life, and social media has become a place to seek validation through likes and followers. And so if you're kind of searching for affirmation and love, and you're not getting that from your closest family members or caregivers, you might be seeking that in other places that might not be as helpful or reinforcing. And social isolation is, of course, another risk factor for social media overuse. And even before the pandemic, you didn't see a lot of kids out wandering the neighborhood the way kids did when we were all growing up. A lot, it could take a whole discussion to figure out why that is, but kids are spending a lot more time indoors and on their devices, and then the pandemic just took that type of isolation to another level.
Yeah, that's remind me the other day I was wandering in a park in Barcelona, and it was so interesting because there was a group of kids playing, and just in front of everybody on the bench that perhaps before they will have been watching them, right? But everybody was on the smartphone. Right? It was like they were like not even 10 years old. I was like, come on, I didn't have my first Nokia at that age, or Ericsson, whatever it was in the 19s. I mean, that was like, but yeah, I mean, that's another situation that we are facing, and the point is really to reconnect, and wondering really if in person is not deep and meaningful than in social media, or if social media can be a safer place. So that's going to be your next research, Julie, about safer, psychologically safe place online and in platforms. And actually, as we're talking creating those psychological safe place and making, you know, even social media and the platform safer, what can, you know, families or even friends do to protect their kids, and especially addressing the very difficult balance, right, where you are just as a mother and, you know, the kid, mama, the phone, and you're just like, okay, 1 second, okay, 5 minutes whatsoever, 5 minutes gone, and again mama, and then the kids try to, and it's just like this. And that's a certain age, but then when they're a teen, it's just uncontrollable, right? And even they go again. So first of all, what parents can do, and what the platforms allow them to do, and second, what do you think is the best way to balance that? And I know there is not one answer, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I wish that there was someone who could just say, this is the exact number of hours, you know, that you can spend safely on social media or gaming or whatever. There are, you know, of course, recommendations from the American Academy of Pediatrics, for example, but there's no magic number for one, you know, for one child or teen. You know, an hour a day may be harmful, and for another 3 hours a day might be perfectly okay. So it's, you know, you kind of have to look at the individual child. But I think, you know, what I tell parents frequently, and what I frequently say in my columns, is that probably the best defense against all of the harms that kids can get into on social media is to have frequent, ongoing conversations about safe and healthy social media use. There are all sorts of tools that can help, like screen time limits and in-app settings that can restrict content, but kids can circumvent those things. And even if they don't, no tech guardrails are perfect. So having conversations with your kids about what they're seeing online, who they're engaging with, is really important. And also asking open-ended questions, asking them about their experience and why they like, you know, Instagram or TikTok, what they're getting out of it, trying to help them bring some self-awareness to their own usage, and really, you know, ask them why do you like to watch these videos, and what do you get out of it, to really understand where they are. And also, you know, not to overreact or judge, which is really hard to do sometimes as a parent. You know,
Yeah.
the knee-jerk reaction, like, that looks bad, don't do it. You want your kids to feel like they can come to you if there is a problem. So sometimes just trying to practice some restraint as a parent and not overreacting when you see something that could be, you know, or could feel problematic to you, is important, so that they feel like it's safe to come to you if they do encounter something that they're not sure how to handle. And as for, you know, the way to balance that, I mean, some experts feel like taking tech away as a punishment isn't effective or particularly good, and that using it as a reward isn't healthy either. But, you know, again, it depends on the child. And some families find that for a child, the prospect of losing tech privileges is a strong motivator to getting their homework done and doing all the other things they need to do. So you kind of have to, you know, do some trial and error and feel what works best for your particular child, because every kid responds to things differently. But I think the bottom line is to really be, whatever you choose to do, whatever you feel works best, is to be consistent with it, whatever system you use, so that your kids are clear on what the expectations are, and, you know, to develop some, whatever the consequences you feel are appropriate for tech misuse, just being consistent and clear around those.
Yeah, no, thank you very much for sharing that, and especially the fact that, yeah, just pointing there is not ABC guide, right? Otherwise it will be the 1 million, you know, tool, and that will be looked for. And
also, just further to that, you know, also being aware that the things that worked for your child when they were 10 might not work anymore when they're 13 or 15. And so you might have to evolve, you know, your rules or your protocols as your child gets older, and just being aware that this is an evolving thing, and it's not like a one and done conversation. It's something that you're going to be having to talk to your kids about on an ongoing basis. You know, like if your child is, you know, watching YouTube at age 10, there are conversations around that. If they're older and they're on social media, the conversation is going to change. And so, unfortunately, that's just a lot of work for parents to keep up with all of the different apps and what's happening on them, and just to keep having those conversations as your kids get older.
And have you seen any beneficial use of the parental control that some social media apps allow to?
Yeah, actually, a lot of the social media apps do have some really good parental controls. It's a matter of figuring out how to find them and how to set them up. It's not always intuitive, and it's different on every app. Some of them have good default settings that provide some content restriction based on age. And of course, that depends on your child entering their correct birth date when they sign up for the app. So if they're lying and saying that they're older than they are, those default settings that are intended for younger users aren't going to take effect. And second, just making sure that you figure out the parental controls, and you also explain to your children up front why you're instituting those, and explain that you're doing that to keep them safe, with the hopes that they'll understand that this is something you're doing together, that it's not a way for you to control them. And in fact, I think a lot of advocacy organizations are trying to get away from the term parental controls, because who wants to be controlled?
Yeah.
The idea is that you want to work with your kids on making sure that they feel safe, and that you kind of explain to them the tools that they have also within the apps to block people who might be bullying them, to report people who might be posting offensive or inappropriate content. There are things that they can do. It's not all about the parents setting up the controls. There are a lot of really good tools within the apps themselves that the kids can make use of, and often they know all about these, and they often are very comfortable using them.
Yeah, and have you seen the use of those? As of now, we call it the control parental for this control tools to work, or to be rather a backlash?
No, I think they can be really effective, but it can't be the only thing that you rely on. Again, it comes down to having conversations about healthy and safe social media use. So then I think the parental control tools are complementary to that. They can be effective if the kids aren't, finding ways around them.
Yeah, that reminds me this policy that China applied. I don't know if you have heard of it or in the room, that was limiting online video game to 3 hours per week for kids under 18. So you can imagine this kind of rule applying in other places in the world, but we didn't have any insight, I guess, or at least I didn't have any insight about how this turned out. I think it was in last summer.
Yeah, actually, I did write about that when it happened. And I think, obviously that kind of, government type of control over social media use is not going to happen here. And I don't think anybody necessarily wants something like that to happen. But I framed that conversation about, sometimes as a parent, you feel like you're the bad guy. And wouldn't it be just easier if someone else just said, here are the rules, kids, you can only play video games, an hour a day or whatever, and not have to be that, that bad guy that's always instituting those rules. But I don't know. I haven't seen any research out of China yet to see how that's going, and if that's, that's actually having a positive impact on some of the things that the Chinese government was worried about in terms of kids, maybe not performing as well in school and that kind of thing.
Yeah, that's interesting. But actually, like, speaking about what institution can do, what have you had any insight or experience about what institutions such as schools, health centers, or even communities, what can they do to support kids and children?
A lot of schools have restricted tech usage during the day. There's the issue of students having their laptops with them at all times for school-related purposes, and there's software that some schools have started using that can restrict the types of websites they go to during the school day, or restrict their YouTube usage and what YouTube channels they can watch during school hours, to try to kind of get a handle on extraneous usage during the day. And a lot of schools also have rules around not having phones in the classroom to kind of cut down on those distractions. But in terms of the content, I think it comes down to education about how social media works on the brain and how to be mindful about your use. And I think when you talk to kids about this, no one wants to feel like they're getting hacked or that they're being manipulated. Kids certainly, they don't, there's been a lot of evidence, and when you talk to kids about how advertisers trying to kind of manipulate their buying decisions, studies have shown students don't like that when they feel like they're being manipulated by advertisers. And I think you can have the same type of conversation with kids about, hey, this is how these social media apps are designed. They're designed to keep you using it over and over again. And this is how the algorithm keeps you, sucked in. And when kids realize that, I think the reaction that I've gotten and having this discussion with my own kids is like, well, that's not cool. They want to be in control of themselves. And so if you can talk to them about being intentional about using social media and how to choose who they follow, and how they can prune their feed at any time if they feel like it's making them feel badly in any way, those can be helpful discussions that I think educators and parents and other caregivers can have with kids, just to get them to understand like how these systems operate and how they need to be mindful of it.
Yeah, no, that's an extremely good point, and that's something that even with my collaboration, my co-founders, we're talking about the imperative to not only have in education everything about sex education, nutrition, but also have brain education, which is exactly that. Is a new tool. Like, as you feed yourself with food, you also feed yourself with social media content. So how do you deal with that? So that's extremely interesting. And have you seen any school or any organization doing that already? Just by curiosity.
I mean, I know that a lot of schools will bring in outside speakers who specialize in digital safety to come in and address parents and students. Some schools may very well have a more systematic approach. I don't have a whole lot of insight into what specific schools are doing on this, but certainly I think more could and should be done. It should be part of the general discussion about like we're talking about nutritional health and physical health and sex education. Like social media health should be a part of the everyday discussion, because it's such a big part of kids' lives now.
Yeah, no, thank you very much for bringing that. And I see some few questions already, so we are going to just end with this last question. So Julie, what are the 3 most surprising facts that you have discovered in the past year and that you would like to share with us?
I think rather than 3 particular things, I would say that the really one big revelation that came to me with this year in my reporting in the last year was just how great the influence of social media can be on kids. And I think the ticks story I did really showed that social media can have real physical effects. People can argue about causation versus correlation, but doctors all over the world were seeing these teens who had never had tics suddenly start to develop them. And the major commonality among them was that they'd been watching a stream of videos of people with tics. And I think that and some of my other reporting really kind of was a wake-up call about how vulnerable some young people are to the power of social media's influence. And it may not be every child. I mean, maybe there are a lot of teens who can watch those videos and be okay. But they're, different vulnerabilities that we all have and different things that we're susceptible to. And for young people, especially with underlying mental health issues, a lot of care has to be taken in the type of content that they're seeing, because for some kids it can be really harmful.
Thank you very much for bringing that, Julie. And now we're going to take some questions from the audience. Thank you so much for being here and for actually asking those questions. So first of all, starting with Karin, had an issue about the form of tech misuse that parents are using. One form of tech misuse for parents using their kids to brag or get likes on social media. So who talks to adults and how would you have that conversation with a friend of a colleague? So there is a lot of talks about, yes, kids should do that, but actually, how do you speak with a parent about even its responsibility, right? Which is not all about and kids. And please, Karin, jump in if I misunderstood your question.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really good point. You know, and it gets back to what we were talking about earlier in the conversation, that adults have issues with self-control on social media too. And I've seen exactly what Karen has described here, and I think I've written some columns about that. I think it was about students getting accepted into colleges, and how a lot of parents will post really kind of over the top posts about their student, celebrating that their student has gotten into their college of choice, and that can make other parents feel badly. So who talks to the adults? I guess that would just, if you feel comfortable, if you have a friend that's been kind of posting those kind of posts and it makes you feel badly, you know, you can kind of just try to turn away from that, or choose not to follow that person, or you don't have to actually unfollow them. You can silence their posts so that you're not, they don't see that you've unfriended them, but you're just not seeing their posts anymore. That may be the best ways to just not see that stuff anymore. But if you do have a comfort level with addressing that with a friend, you could say, you know, hey, I'm really, you know, proud of you and your child for their accomplishments. But when I see that, it makes me feel, you know, it makes me feel badly. And if you know, have a trusted conversation, I mean, maybe that other parent doesn't realize that what they're posting is making other people feel badly. And maybe that wasn't their intention in doing that. Maybe they really truly are trying to celebrate their child's success because their child overcame a lot, and they wanted to shout out some recognition for all that their child has been through to accomplish that. So they may not even just really realize what they're doing. So you could have a conversation starter just about how their posts make you feel. But I think you might have to be prepared for that to be the end of your friendship too. I mean, because you don't know how that person's going to react. And if they're really a true friend, they'll probably step back from that or explain themselves. But they might not take it well. I don't know. I haven't had that conversation with someone myself. I have seen those posts. I'm well aware of them, and I usually just choose to keep scrolling, or I'll hit like, or I won't. And I've probably been guilty of doing that myself. So yeah, I think it's just comes down to, you know, really trying to be intentional about what you post, and when you post, thinking like, why am I posting this? Who's my audience, and what do I want them to get out of this? And so maybe, you know, parents can do a better job of explaining in the caption why they're posting that. Maybe they just say, and I've seen some parents do this, well, they'll post some happy news about their child, and they say, I just want to brag for a moment. Okay, it is what it is, you know. And others might say, you know, my child overcame so much hardship, and the fact that they graduated, and, you know, this year was, you know, was testament to all of that we've been through. And then by explaining, you know, maybe in a caption or in the post itself, why they're posting, that might help other parents understand where they're coming from. I hope I answered that sufficiently. I don't have a perfect answer how you address that with fellow adults.
Thank you, Julie. Good. And there is another question from Mel, who is asking about what are your thoughts on helping kids build more supportive, genuine relationship and communities online. So is that a good idea, or should we generally just seek to limit our kids' time online? So, for example, and that's a very good point, is instead of scrolling, they can have a community group such as sport teams or club that they can engage with differently.
I mean, I think that the general wisdom is that in-person interactions are always richer and deeper. However, I mean, there are a lot of kids who I think can really build truly supportive and genuine relationships online with friends, even with friends they've never met in person. You know, my son, for example, he plays video games with a group of friends from all over the world that he's never met in person. And they were really his lifeline during the pandemic. You know, when he couldn't see his school friends in person, he was communicating with a group of boys his same age that he'd been playing with already for some time. And that was wonderful for him, and really beneficial. And I don't honestly know what his life experience would have been like during that time if he didn't have that group of friends to communicate with on a regular basis. So I think the key is to like understand who the people are that your kids are communicating with, making sure, you know, that they're not adults, and that they, you know, are who they say they are, to the extent that you can verify that. If they're not people your child knows in person that they're playing with online, or that they're engaging with online through social media, you know, I think it's possible to make friends that you didn't make in person online. And I think that has become a very normal part of their lives. And for many kids, that's really broadened their horizons. And they're meeting people that from all walks of life that they might not even have access to in their own community. And they're talking to people with diverse backgrounds. That is a really wonderful way for them to get to know people who aren't, you know, don't look and, you know, just like them, and who go to school with them. So I think it can be a really good thing as long as, you know, you're kind of careful about it and you understand who they're talking to, and that they're not people that have some sort of malicious intent. And the way we kind of know who these kids are is because, like my son, he plays, his video game system is not in his bedroom, it's in our living room, so we can hear everything he's saying. And my husband has joined in their games before. He's talked to these kids while they've been playing together. It's kind of the same 5 kids. My son has learned about them. You know, we know that they're kids, in other words, and we feel comfortable with that.
Yeah, Julie. So that actually, you may want to give us some more learnings about that and lessons that we need. So thank you for sharing that. There's another question from Nancy, and just to provide you more context, I will read through her line. So basically, Nancy is saying limiting kids' access to technology is challenging with twins and teens. At a certain point, it is socially stifling to have no access. That's true, yeah. So as parents and educators, we have responsibility to educate our children both on the potential perils of social media and the coping skills with viewing it. So have you heard any good examples of program or resources on how to provide this prevention and intervention support?
You know, there are a lot of local educators that have private, you know, companies where their whole job is to be a kind of a screen time or cyber safety educator. I can get back to you to see if there's a website that may list them all. I'm not sure if there's one universal place to find them. I'm aware of several in, you know, different locations, including Minnesota and California, that routinely go into schools and try to educate students about this type of thing. So yes, they're out there. You might ask your school district if they are aware of any and have invited any to give presentations. I know my school district has invited a local person who's kind of an expert in screen safety to come in and address parents, and also has done some workshops for kids. So oftentimes schools have relationships with some of these organizations. I'm just not sure if there's a kind of one universal group, but there are some kind of franchised groups that do it.
Have you seen this kind of help more impactful than helps from parents?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
Sorry, I am asking if the kind of help coming from schools or communities has proven to be more effective than the one that parents are trying to make. Like, is it more helpful coming from parents versus a community or schools?
I think that depends on the relationship that the student or young person has with their parent. If they have a good open relationship, I think you know, parents can be very effective. And you know, oftentimes parents are, you know, the most influential people that a child will have in their lives, and having those early and often discussions are helpful when it comes from the parents and starts in the home. But you know, if kids don't have a good relationship with their parents, or their parents don't feel equipped to have these conversations with their kids, you know, kids can definitely benefit from having these conversations with other trusted adults in their lives. So I think it just, you know, just goes back to how that parent-child relationship and how how effective that can be. And a lot of parents just feel like at a loss of how to advise their kids, because this is not something we all grew up with. And so it's sometimes it's really hard to understand what kids should or shouldn't be doing on their devices, because it's just not something we experienced as children ourselves. So we're kind of we're trying to figure it out as we go.
Yeah, indeed. And talking about that, there is another question from Karen, who is asking if you seen kids going into school to talk about their own experience, or college students who may have struggled with social media addiction and no control it. So peer-to-peer often work too.
Yes, that's a really good point, and that's actually been found to be really powerful. It's one thing when adults are telling kids, don't do this or don't do that. It's definitely very powerful when kids are talking to their peers or to students that are slightly younger than themselves. And there's a group of teens that are doing this out of Minnesota. There's an advocacy group there. I can get back to you with the name and information from them. And that's exactly what they're trying to do, is have peers go into schools and talk to fellow students about this, because I think that kids, when they learn from someone who's a couple of years older than them, and they tend to look up to older kids, when they hear from them, that can be really powerful. And I actually wrote a column where I kind of handed over the mic to a bunch of teenage young women and college-age women to talk about how they have learned to use Instagram in a more healthy way. And that was very popular, and it was widely shared, not just by parents, but I heard anecdotally it was shared pretty widely on college campuses, because you had these young women talking about how they had some issues with using Instagram, and how they over time learned some techniques and ways to make it a more positive experience. And I think that was far more powerful than anything I could have said in my own voice to young people, or if I was just quoting experts, adult experts in these fields. I think young people really appreciate and value hearing stories from other young people on what they've learned.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing this, Julie. And yeah, it's really interesting, this idea of having like mental health buddies almost, right, in school. And even the fact that it's coming from outside now, even thinking if it's something that even schools could implement, right?
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. I mean, you have like reading buddies, like my kids' school, some of the older kids will go into the classrooms of the kindergartners and kind of act as reading buddies and help them with that. I mean, that would be an amazing idea if schools start doing something like that, where maybe high school students talk to middle school students. That could be really effective. That would be really cool.
Yeah. And actually, have you seen any this issue brought in parents group? You have sometimes the schools that are having parents reunion or whatever to tackle some issues, and usually it's always about the quality of food or these kind of things. But let's say more important issues, this one sometimes brought up. So I wonder if you have seen that happening.
If I've seen parents bringing to their schools the idea.
I mean, when schools have those gathering with parents that want to discuss this issue, I mean, issues about things that are going on in the school, and that's why as I was mentioning the quality of food, but as an example. But I'm wondering if in those groups that are these parental groups that are at school, if the issue of social media use has been brought up more and more.
I don't have a broad insight into how often that's brought up at schools. I know at my kids' schools it has come up from time to time in parent groups and maybe smaller groups, kind of smaller group discussions among parents. I've heard, concerns voiced. I don't know if there's been a big, push. There's an organization called Wait Until 8th that has had some, has kind of a national reach, where parents agree together to wait until their kids are in 8th grade to give them their first phone, for example. So there are some efforts like that for parents to come to an agreement, because it's hard if you're the only kid that doesn't have a phone and all your friends have phones. Well, even if your parents want you to wait until a certain age, 8th grade or whatever it might be, it's kind of hard to enforce if everybody else has a phone. So there has been some effort on the part of some organizations to try to get parents to collectively agree on something like that, and try to stick to that, so that they're, at least in one friend group, for example, that their child might not be the only one that doesn't have a phone, or the only one that doesn't have an Instagram account. Because as we all know, it gets harder and harder as they get older to restrict or limit those things, as all of their friends have something, a communication platform that they're not part of, and they're suddenly left out.
Yeah. And it's all come back to the point that you were mentioning, is it's really self-awareness and education can really have a lasting effect. So yeah, thank you very much, Julie. I wonder if there is any question that we didn't address in the room. So we have a couple of minutes left.
Please, we have a satisfaction survey. If you can just, if you're looking at, yeah, I hope you're seeing it right. If you can please help us. It's just 2 questions survey. If you can just check it for us, we will appreciate it, because we want to get a feedback from you, know how you feel, And like Barry said, we want to hear some voices. We know some of you might have some answers to some of the questions posed, or some experiences that you want to share. If you can do that, that would be great.
Yeah. So for those who want to follow up on the conversation, we have shared Julie's Twitter on the chat, and also all her articles on the Wall Street Journal, which are absolutely amazing. So strongly recommended. You are going to start scrolling and getting to the next, but that's actually a good source. And yes, please, if you ever have any question, feel free to reach out. And Ngozi has kindly shared the contact information. And yeah,
you also really know that this event is going to be on our YouTube channel. And if you checked the links that I sent earlier, you will see our YouTube channel. It has all the past events, and it has this one. It will have this in a couple of days in the YouTube channel. So because many members of our community, sometimes the time slot doesn't favor them to be with us. So they've made that request that we release it, please, so that many of them we have opportunity to also listen to the experts. Okay.
So yeah, feel free to share it. And thank you so much again, Julie, for being here. Thank you for honestly just working on this issue. I mean, for me, it's like always going to the Wall Street Journal and looking for those topics, and it's been extremely helpful for all of us. So thank you for your amazing work, your amazing research, and honestly, I'm looking forward during this summer. So don't take too long holiday, because we are going to chase you on that one. So yeah.
Julie, please, one thing you will also do for us, chase us adults, because some of us are more addicted to this than the kids, I was flying the other day, and everybody had a phone. Everybody was just like this, and nobody interacts anymore. It's just becoming a pandemic as it is. So I don't know what we have to do to continue to re-engage better as humans, instead of re-engaging with tools. We really need to start relearning that, and how do we go about it? So I miss your research and the exposure and everything that happens. If you can put that together, then we'll meet you here sooner than later. Okay, please.
Well, thank you very much for having me and inviting me to this. I really appreciate the opportunity to address your members and to talk about this. And I look forward to, speaking with, any audience member who wants to talk about these things. You know where to find me at the Wall Street Journal. So thank you very much, and thank you, Baya, for inviting me and moderating.
Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you very much for being
there.
Thank you all for being part of our community today.